Alien Romulus. Boy, this is one of those franchises, kind of like Terminator, that refuses to die, right? This is the fifth film in the franchise. You had Aliens, the most clever title ever in the franchise. Alien 3, and then Alien Resurrection. I'm not counting the Predator versus Alien or Alien versus Predator films. Why would you? I was kind of into seeing this movie because, based on the trailers and based on the look of the film, it looked like something that I was familiar with in terms of I thought the Alien franchise got a little off its mark. Alien 3 was a complete letdown with the killing of the characters that we all came to love, Newt and Corporal Hicks, and then Alien 3, Kevin Fincher, which was his directorial debut. He killed them in the first frame of the movie, so that kind of took me out of that film to begin right there to begin with. And then Alien Resurrection, oh man, that was just a mess. But and I'm going to come back to that film later on in this review. So I was thinking, okay, well, it looks like they're trying to take this franchise back to the basics, and I was like, okay, let me go take a look at it. It looked like it had more sci-fi to it. You had the clunky, the big industrial machines, the big, ugly, dirty-looking spaceships. So I'm like, okay, this is going back to Ridley Scott's playground with this franchise. And while it's a good thing, I think that the filmmakers wanted to strip the story down back to its basics. Pretty much a crew on a spaceship being threatened by an alien, a xenomorph. Unfortunately, it's almost to the point where this film follows the original Alien almost beat for beat. In other words, if you are of my age group, you may be bored sitting through this film. Now, my understanding is that this movie takes place in between the very first Alien back in 1979 and Aliens, the fantastic sequel from James Cameron in 1986, I believe. That kind of made me interested to see this movie too, because it's like, all right, are there stories to tell between what happened between the events of Alien and Aliens? It's a stretch because if you see Aliens, and I highly recommend you watch that if you haven't, it's more of a action film than action sci-fi than a horror sci-fi. The story is so much like the first Alien that I found myself kind of, I don't know, not that I wasn't interested, but not surprised by anything. It seemed like, from 1979 to 2024, I've seen it all that they're showing me in this film. If you're of my generation, like I said, you may be bored through a lot of this. It will feel like a retread. I can understand if you're going to present the same story to a new generation, but you got to know, as filmmakers, you got to know that my generation is going to come see this too. So the fact that they pepper in all of these callbacks that are so unnecessary, it's very disappointing. If you're going to retread what I've already seen, at least own it. Make it your own. Don't call back to things that I've already seen and could arguably say were done better in the past. At the beginning of the film, in the first act, as with all of the Alien movies that I recall, you meet a crew. You meet a crew of people who are determined to go where these xenomorphs are for whatever reason. Now, to be fair, in this film, the crew is not aware what they are about to confront. But as they introduce the crew, you can kind of determine who's going to be first to get killed off by their attitudes, how they act. The script creates these characters that the screenwriters know, well, the audience will love to see that person die. And we get that in this film like we've gotten in all of the films. You're always going to have a character that's either a clone or a synthezoid, or whatever they call them. And we get that here in the character of Andy, played by David Jonsson. And I will tell you, his performance is probably the standout performance of the film. Every scene he's in, he kind of sucks the camera or the charisma right into him. His actions are pretty standard for an Alien movie. I'm not going to say anything, but if you've seen the other Alien films and they had a synth in them, you either are always questioning that character's loyalty, or they're going to be clearly an evil character, and they are programmed to do what's in the best interest of the company being Weyland Yutani. I'm not going to say which way this character goes. They try to do a little variation on it, and they maybe stretch it a little bit. I'm not going to get into the details, but there's a lot of switching and going back and forth with this character. But I will say David Jonsson was a standout performance in this movie. There's a line that's quoted in this film that comes from one of the other films, but when the character says it, I literally rolled my eyes. I'm like, no, don't go there. Don't do that. Because it's clearly a line that is thrown into the script just for Easter egg or fanboy thrills. Because the character says this line, and it's an iconic line that comes from one of the previous films that was made it was in total proper context when it was uttered in the previous films, one of the previous films. But when the character says it here, it really makes no sense other than to make the people in my generation say, "Oh yeah." And in the theater where I saw this movie, there were some people that said, "Yeah." I'm like, oh, get a life. There's another callback in this movie that is set up to be quintessential to get the plot to move in this film, but it is so cringeworthy. It was so disappointing that they felt they needed to bring this element, I'll just say this element, back from a previous film into this film. And I'm thinking, man, you guys didn't need to do that. First of all, it created the need for one of the most off-putting special effects or visual effects in the movie. The movie would have been fine, the plot would have been fine without this obvious callback to a previous film, which no one of the generation after me would give a damn about anyway. So I don't even know why they did it. It's also confusing. I'm thinking, well, how was that here when it was there in one of the previous movies? I'm trying to be very coy here. And it was just a bad choice, a tacky choice, and an unnecessary choice. And it was a very distracting one as well. Going back to the characters that we meet at the beginning, I want to touch on that a little bit more also. It was just a little bit of a conflict that I felt the film presents when it wants to rehash the past. But in the past films, particularly the first Alien movie, which I think is where most of the DNA from this film comes from. That first movie, we were seeing all of this new universe or this new world for the first time, this new environment. We were seeing the alien for the first time. The first time we saw the chest burster. That was a head buster. What makes that movie unique is that it's the claustrophobia of the ship, the confines of the ship, and this one alien stalking the members of the crew, right? But they took their time to build up the characters, and every time you saw a character death, whether the character was despicable or not, you felt that. This film, they don't really take time to build up the characters, and as a result, there are deaths. I'm not spoiling that. I don't think I'm spoiling anything. There are deaths involved. But when a character dies in this movie, it's like, okay, I didn't feel anything. It's like this film was crafted like they know, well, we know everyone knows the lore of the xenomorph, so we don't need to get into what a facehugger is or give a lot of exposition on that. As soon as we show a facehugger, everyone's going to know what the deal is. And I get it. It does help you move the plot along. It's kind of like we don't need to see Bruce Wayne's parents get shot in that alley. But to a certain degree, I think they gave short shrift to some of these characters by just putting them in a situation where they're going to go to this environment where there's going to be danger and these aliens that they have to fight. I think they could have done a little bit more introspection on these characters before just throwing them into the mix. As a result, I couldn't tell you any of the names of the characters. When I left that theater, I only knew the names of 2 people. Well, 3. I'm not going to mention that other character because that could be spoiling it. But I just remember the names of the synthezoid. His name was Andy. And the main character, who has an odd name, her name is Rain. I don't get that. But what I found interesting about this relationship between Rain and Andy, it struck me as almost as complex, and when I say complex, as kind of side eye-ish as the relationship between Rey and Finn in the latest Star Wars films, the last three Star Wars films, which was kind of weird. The director, I think his name was Fede Alvarez, he made another very odd choice by casting actors who had very thick, I don't know if it's Cockney accents, but I think the term is chav accents. Chav, my understanding, it's a British slang meaning kind of like lower class, working class Brits. I could hardly understand what the hell they were saying. And when these characters were talking, when I couldn't understand what they were saying, which was a lot of the time, I don't understand why the director made that choice. It was very difficult to understand the dialogue. Now, although I've been, kind of throwing shade at this movie for being a rehash, beat for beat almost, to a certain degree, to the first Alien film, there's one rehash that is by necessity. It has to appear in an Alien movie, and I would have been disappointed had it not appeared, and that is the facehuggers. We see a scene, or we get a scene in this film. It's an amazing set piece. You've seen it in the trailers. It starts off with two guys in a room where there's a lot of water, and you can hear the guy saying, "There's something in the water." That's how he sounds. Something in the water.
Just get up.
I'm not playing around. There's something in the water.
What do you mean there's something in the
I don't know.
water?
There's just something in the fucking water.
That scene, we get to see the facehuggers full bore. Now, I believe there was an Alien versus Predators movie where we kind of saw, if I remember correctly, we kind of saw the facehuggers doing their thing, but in this one, it's like they're like roaches. It's a pretty effective scene. It's a very suspenseful scene. So I will give the film that. They do create this set piece that stands out and is very original and unique. I do kind of want to call foul on one element of this particular set piece that involves the facehuggers. I think they kind of retcon the facehuggers' ability or one of their limitations in acquiring a victim. I'm not going to say what it is, but I don't remember this being part of their lore in the first four movies. I'll just say that I think they kind of added a new element to the facehuggers in order to move the scene along involving the characters. But it was effective. And what they do, it's believable. It's just, well, we never saw that before, or that was never the case before. I think you could pick holes in it, but ultimately it did work and it was an effective scene, so I'll let it pass. There's another really effective scene, which is kind of cribbed from Aliens, the second film. It involves the main character, I'm going to call her the Ripley stand-in. The actress's name is Cailee something or other. I can't remember her full name. But it's her and the synth, Andy. They are in a jam with the xenomorphs. And there's this really brilliant, I got to give the film this too. There's this really brilliant running gag involving gravity on this ship that they have gotten onto, where gravity recycles itself every so often. So gravity will go to zero, and then after a few minutes or so, gravity will kick in. And that creates throughout the movie a lot of really good suspenseful moments. Well, in this one scene, this one set piece, the second really good set piece of this film, it involves Andy and Rain trying to deal with some xenomorphs. They are in a hallway, and it involves them trying to deal with these creatures that have acid for blood. That's all I'll say. The scene just builds and builds and builds, and there's an element, or there's a part of the scene where that zero gravity plays a pivotal role in one of these characters dying instantly. So I'll leave it there, but I will say that scene was fantastic. It was literally on the edge of your seat type of thing. One of the things that almost pulled me out of this movie, well, as the franchise went on and on and on with 3 subsequent movies, I feel like, I know in Aliens it was the case, and I don't remember Alien 3, or I want to say in Alien 3 as well, and in Resurrection, seemed like that shelf life from facehugger to chestburster, got increasingly shorter. But in this film, it's like no time at all. And again, I attribute that to the fact that the filmmakers are like, well, the audience already knows what's going to happen. We don't have to delay these things coming out of the chest. Just make it happen so we can keep things moving. That kind of took me out. I'm trying not to spoil this, but there's a chest burster scene that seems like it takes place way too fast after the face hugger part of the life cycle. And that kind of brings me to the absolute worst part of this film, and one of the absolute worst callbacks. It's a callback from Alien Resurrection, and it is one of the worst elements of Alien Resurrection that they chose to call back to. I'm not going to give anything away, but it is like, why would you repeat what no one liked? It completely took me out of the movie. It was it almost became like a B movie. It became like a Sam Raimi movie where Sam Raimi is unrestrained. And as much as I like Sam Raimi, that isn't good in this caliber of sci-fi. It was the most jaw-droppingly stupid and seemingly tacked on ending of a third act that I've seen in I don't know when. This third act, or the conclusion of the third act, that is what's going to cause me to give this film only 2.5 reels. I was prepared to give it 3 reels right at the beginning of the third act because of the 2 fantastic set pieces. But those 2 set pieces, like, okay, this is a three reel movie, maybe 3.5. But after that last part hit, nope, that dropped it down to 2.5. And by the way, before I go, I do have to do an editor's note. I said this is the 5th film. I was way off. We had Alien Prometheus and Alien Covenant. That's the Martini. Go see it. Have a good time. Come back and let me know what you think.